At least 49 people have been killed and more than 40 others wounded in shooting at two mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, after a gunman opened indiscriminate fire at worshippers, some as though were kneeling at prayer. Authorities have warned Muslims not to visit mosques anywhere in New Zealand. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the assault on the mosques appeared to be a well-planned terrorist attack. Police have asked people not to share the footage which was circulated online following the assault and are working to have it removed. Officials also warn web users they could be liable for up to 10 years in jail for sharing such objectionable content. Here is what Ben Shapiro have to say concerning this assault.
Let's start with obviously stomach-churning, horrifying, evil white supremacist terror attack on mosques in New Zealand. If you didn't lose sleep last night, it's because you weren't following the story closely enough. If you don't feel sick to your stomach after reading the coverage of all of this, after reading about the evil of the participants in this, then legitimately you're not paying close enough attention to the story. It is utterly horrifying in every conceivable way. New York Times reporting 49 people were killed. 49 people were killed in shootings at two mosques in central Christchurch, New Zealand on Friday in a terrorist attack the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern described as extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence. Obviously, this was a white supremacist terror attack that was driven at Islamic centers. Officials said one man in his late 20s had been charged with murder, that two explosive devices were found attached to a vehicle that they had stopped. A Muslim leader in New Zealand said the attack was especially shocking. It took place around Friday prayer, so it was coordinated to be when the mosques were most full. A gunman streamed a live video of the attack on Facebook. He appeared to have posted a manifesto online. We have a rule at Daily Wire. This was established about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, saying that we will not name any mass shooter. We will not name terrorists. We will not name the people who murder innocents in the name of their politics. We're not going to do that. We're also not going to read the terrorist manifesto today. We're not going to give credence to his thoughts. We will mention his politics only to the extent that it is necessary to discuss the overarching political issues that affect the world and affect our nation. But we are not going to quote his manifesto. We are not going to go out of our way to lend any sort of support or credence to not only his manifesto, but to the notion that his manifesto should be used as a guidebook for others. What these folks want, what evil terrorists want, is attention. That's why they commit terrorist attacks. That's why this guy live streamed a video of his attack on Facebook. And it shows you that in our too connected world, we've got a real problem. Because if you are seeking fame, if you are seeking notoriety, then all you have to do is commit an act of evil with a camera in your hand. And we've seen this over and over and over again now. Stop watching the videos. Delete the videos. Suck the air out of the room. Do not provide the impetus for future people, future monsters, monstrous evil people to do stuff like this. It's horrific. And there's also this sense of ersatz community that is created for white supremacists online who are able, because of the internet, to find people who think like them in the dark niches of Western society and non-Western society, able to find these dark niches of people who think like them and who cheer when this sort of stuff happens and who act performatively for the sake of others. You see this when it comes to a lot of bleep posting online, the sort of performative nature of harassing people, bothering people, annoying people. And that's an aspect of free speech. It's not something I like, but it's an aspect of free speech that we all have to just deal with. When that bleeds over into the real world, where performance becomes violence, and where people are performing acts of vile cruelty and evil in order to receive the cheers of others, we have to wonder whether our connected universe is a little bit too connected, because the truth is it's not real connection. Real connection is the connection that we forge with each other when we are offline. How many of your best friends are people that you meet online and never meet in person? How many of the people that you actually connect with are people that you are just talking to in a chat room or on a Reddit board? The answer is probably not many. Most of the deep connections in your life are the people who you meet. And because we don't spend enough time out in the world being with other people, it allows us to other people. It allows us to treat other people as though they are foreign to us, as though they are monsters, as though they are to be clubbed or destroyed in some way. And that's terrible. It really is. Because the reality is when we treat each other face to face, when we see each other face to face, it is exorbitantly rare in good societies, in decent societies, that we treat each other badly when we treat each other face to face. And that's why something like this is so shocking, when the sort of vile underbelly of the internet brews up into the real world and ends with deadly consequences. It really is. And that's not a call for censorship. It's a call for human beings to be better. It's a call for all of us to try harder. It's a call for everyone to get offline and start interacting with people with whom they may not agree and who they may not know. The Prime Minister of New Zealand had a few words to say about this. Here's what she had to say.
It is clear that this is one of New Zealand's darkest days. Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence. Many of those who will have been directly affected by this shooting may be migrants to New Zealand. They may even be refugees here. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They are us. The person who has perpetuated this violence against us is not. They have no place in New Zealand. There is no place in New Zealand for such acts of extreme and unprecedented violence, which it is clear this act was. For now, my thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of all New Zealanders, are with those who have been affected and also with their families. My thoughts also to those in Christchurch who are still dealing with an unfolding situation.
Now, we'll treat the media response to all of this in just a second after we bring you the information, because the media response has been, in many cases, irresponsible, over the top, attempting to cast blame as a first resort, attempting to politicize this stuff. Politicians, particularly one particularly foolish politician who's gotten an inordinate amount of attention, tweeting out ridiculous things. First, let me give you the rest of the information. Shots were fired at Al-Noor Mosque on Deans Avenue in the center of the city and at Linwood Mosque about 3 miles away, the police said. The country's police commissioner, Mike Bush, said in an evening news conference that 41 people had been killed at Al-Noor Mosque and 7 at Linwood Mosque. Another victim had died at Christchurch Hospital. David Meats, the chief executive of the Canterbury District Health Board, said that 48 people, including young children, were being treated for injuries at the hospital. He said the injuries included gunshot wounds and ranged from critical to minor. The International Committee of the Red Cross created a page for reporting the names of people who are missing or accounted for. The police said that 4 people, including 3 men and 1 woman, had been taken into custody. Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia said that one of them was Australian. Mr. Bush said that a man in his late 20s had been charged with murder and would appear in Christchurch court on Saturday morning. A number of firearms were recovered from the scenes of the shootings, he said. By the way, written on the firearms were the names of other mass murderers who had particularly targeted mosques. Of the 3 others who were detained, the police commissioner said that one might have had nothing to do with the attack, and the police were working to determine how the other 2 might have been involved. None of those detained were on security watch lists. 2 explosive devices were found on one vehicle, Mr. Bush said, adding that the police had defused one and were in the process of defusing the other. Mr. Bush had urged people not to go to mosques anywhere in New Zealand on Friday. He also urged mosques nationally to close your doors until you hear from us again, which is just horrifying. Shutting down religious institutions because evil people are attempting to kill people at religious institutions is just insane. Yashar Ali, who is an Iranian-born reporter in the United States, he tweeted out that it takes an amount of bravery for people to identify publicly as religious. And that's true for people who choose to wear hijab. It's true of people who choose to wear side locks if you're Jewish or yarmulkes. It's true for a wide variety of people. That's not bravery. That's just how people live. That's how people live. It's a choice that they've made. And when I see somebody who's chosen to wear a hijab, I mean, it's one of the reasons I was in favor of the Congress changing its rules to allow Ilhan Omar, who I think is terrible for a lot of other reasons, but for this, I think that it's great. Congress changing its rules to allow Ilhan Omar to cover her head on the floor of the Congress if she chooses to do so. That's a wonderful thing, because when you see other people who are attempting to reach out to something larger to them than themselves, people who are attempting to recognize that they are subject to a morality above themselves, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And for people to despise that and try and murder people because of that is such an act of tremendous, tremendous evil. There's a 17-minute video posted to Facebook showing part of the attack. Facebook didn't see it in time, so they didn't take it down in time. The clip, which may have been taken from a helmet camera worn by a gunman, begins behind the wheel of a car. The man, whose face can occasionally be seen in the rearview mirror, drives through the streets of Christchurch before pulling up to the Al-Noor Mosque beside the sprawling Hagley Park. He approaches the mosque on foot, his weapon visible, and begins shooting at people at the entrance. What follows is a harrowing nearly 2 minutes of his firing on worshippers. At one point, the gunman exits the mosque and fires in both directions down the sidewalk before returning to his car for another gun, which, like the others, was inscribed with numbers, symbols, or messages. When he re-enters the mosque, he shoots at several bodies at close range. The video is absolutely horrendous. People should absolutely not watch it or give it coverage. He also posted a white nationalist manifesto on Twitter and 8chan, and people have, of course, been perusing this to see if they can cast aspersions at American political figures. The 8chan post included a link to the gunman's Facebook page where he said he would broadcast the live video of the attack. In the middle of this evil video, Felix Kjellberg, who is PewDiePie, YouTube celebrity, I've been on his meme review, he distanced himself from the attacks because he's not responsible for the attacks. And here's where the media start to lose it. The media start suggesting that because Kjellberg was mentioned by this guy, somehow he is responsible for the attacks. No, there is a sick online meme world where people make references to other people who are online in order to gain attention or in order to polarize. People who don't understand anything about meme world take everything that the folks who are doing in these chat rooms, these threads, they take all of that seriously. Okay, that is not correct. Not only should all of it not be taken seriously, some of it is directly an attempt to generate headlines. Some of it is directly an attempt to implicate people who are not responsible for things. You've seen Candace Owens' name mentioned in this person's manifesto. Candace Owens has nothing to do with this guy, and it's actually pretty obvious from the manifesto itself that he is naming Candace Owens specifically to cause political rifts. The one thing that is clear from this white nationalist manifesto that this piece of human wrote, the one thing that is absolutely clear from that is that he wanted to drive political division. He was seeking to drive political division in the West that would break down along racial lines, and then he could claim that he had started a race war. That was his intent in all of this. And anybody who's perpetuating that is helping him do his work. And that's what he wanted. People have been trying to figure out how exactly they curb social media, what to do about social media. That really is probably not the answer other than actual attempts to create violence. I've said for a long time, you don't get to attribute violence to people unless they are openly calling for violence. If they are openly calling for violence, that's a violation of the First Amendment, and those posts should not be available anywhere. The fact that Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, the fact that they've been looking to take down political posts they don't like, as opposed to targeting actual posts that inflame violence, that are directly attempting to inflame violence, is a blot on the record of these tech companies. The 17-minute video apparently could be found on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram more than an hour after being posted. In order to evade detection, people were cropping the video or posting the text as manifesto as an image, both of which are techniques used to evade automated systems that find and delete the content. Facebook has already invested enormous amounts of resources. They can't be perfect here, of course, and especially when it comes from an account that they weren't actively following. Still, the tech companies need to focus a little more, if they can, on cracking down on incipient violence and a little bit less on the politics that they particularly do not like. Now to the politics of the situation. So we are already seeing the coverage turn toward what drove this evil, disgusting piece of human debris to do all of this. And many in the media think they found their answer, and their answer is Trump. So there is an article from Al Jazeera in which they point out that the manifesto mentions President Trump. It does not mention that President Trump is specifically denounced for his politics. It is a 74-page dossier hailing Trump as a, quote, symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose. But the quote continues that this person does not believe in Trump's politics and does not believe in his values. So here is the point when you look at manifestos like this. First of all, it is not coherent other than a generalized hatred for people who are not of white identity. Second of all, the manifesto itself is memery. It is designed in order to heighten conflict. It is designed to call out certain people to get them centered in the media. It is not designed as an active, coherent call to arms. But the media covering it that way are doing so for political purposes. There are a lot of things that are said in here. The guy called himself an eco-anarchist, or an eco-fascist is what he called himself. They're not quoting that part because it doesn't meet their narrative. And the fact is that you shouldn't be looking at this guy as anything other than an evil white supremacist because that's the overarching message of what he did. But instead, what we're trying to do is now attribute his actions to others. Now, there are people who have reacted badly on both sides of the political aisle. I hesitate even to label Senator Fraser Anning, a member of the Australian Party, as a right-winger, given this kind of rhetoric. But he tweeted out one of the worst statements I have ever seen. Quote, "Does anyone still dispute the link between Muslim immigration and violence?" Are you insane? Are you an insane person? Muslims were just massacred. This is not Muslim immigrants causing violence. This is Muslim immigrants being the victims of violence. What in the absolute hell? I mean, but this guy has a long record of this sort of thing. The reason people are turning to the rhetoric question is because they can't turn to the gun control question. The reason they can't turn to the gun control question is because New Zealand law is some of the most heavily gun controlled on planet Earth. Murders are rare in New Zealand, reports the New York Times. Gun homicides are even rarer. There were 35 murders countrywide in 2017. Since 2007, gun homicides have been in the single digits every year except 2009, but there are plenty of guns. There were 1.2 million registered firearms in the country of 4.6 million people in 2017, which just goes to show you that high levels of gun ownership don't necessarily mean high levels of gun violence. It depends who owns the gun. New Zealand law allows any person aged 16 or older with an entry-level firearm license to keep any number of common rifles and shotguns. Most guns can be purchased without being tracked by law enforcement officials. With that said, there are still some very heavy gun control regulations in New Zealand. Virtually every person who owns a firearm has to be registered. The media is trying to turn this into a gun control debate, but the fact is that that compared to the United States, their gun control is pretty serious. It's pretty serious. So potential gun owners in New Zealand have to pass a police background check. For example, the gun laws in Australia were tightened following a 1996 mass shooting in which 35 people were killed by a lone gunman in Tasmania. Within 2 weeks, Australian lawmakers banned rapid-fire rifles and shotguns and introduced tighter laws governing ownership of other weapons. New Zealand has some of these laws on the books, and of course, they have an incredibly low murder rate. So this is really not about gun control. Nonetheless, what you are seeing from some people is a call for gun control. You're also seeing people trot out their slogans at the wrong time. So one of the big things that happens in the United States is whenever there is a massacre of some sort, people immediately say that their thoughts and prayers are with the folks who were hurt, which is a way of expressing empathy. Aren't we told that in politics and in life, sympathy and empathy are good things? And if I say that I'm praying for people who just lost loved ones, that is my expression of care for them? And yet it has become a thing in the United States that if you say thoughts and prayers, what that really is a way of you avoiding the harder discussions about policy and rhetoric. There's only one problem. This was a massacre carried out at a mosque where people were legitimately praying because they wanted to be in consonance with something higher than themselves. That did not stop Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, very fresh and very face, from tweeting out, quote, "At first I thought of saying, imagine being told your house of faith isn't safe anymore. But I couldn't say imagine because of Charleston, Pittsburgh, Sutherland Springs. What good are your thoughts and prayers when they don't even keep the pews safe?" What the hell does she even mean by that? These were Muslims, religious Muslims, praying to Allah. They were there to pray. They were there to commune with something greater. What good are your thoughts and prayers when they don't even keep the pews safe? This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what religion does. Religion does not suggest that if you pray, you will be safer. Religion suggests that if you pray, you may become better because you're thinking about something greater than yourself. And then she tries to walk this absolute crap back. She says this is a time of great vulnerability for our communities. We must come together, fight for each other, and stand up for neighbors. Isolation, dehumanizing stereotypes, hysterical conspiracy theories, and hatred ultimately lead to the anarchy of violence. We cannot stand for it. Fine. Then she says this, thoughts and prayers is a reference to the NRA's phrase used to deflect conversation away from policy change during tragedies, not directed to the Prime Minister Ardern, who I greatly admire. Well, no, thoughts and prayers is not an NRA phrase. Thoughts and prayers is a phrase that is used by decent people all around the world for legitimately centuries. To suggest that thoughts and prayers is just a way to shirk responsibility for a gun control debate that you feel like having at this particular time is the blood's still on the pavement. Just horrifying. But of course, the whole thing is horrifying, and the reaction is horrifying. The truth is, every human being of decency is united on this. Everybody believes that this human piece of excrement should pay whatever is the ultimate price in New Zealand, and so should anybody who is associated with this act of absolutely evil terror. Everyone agrees on this stuff. And people who are trying to generate false division based on the fact that they don't like Trump, or they don't like guns, or they don't like environmentalism, whoever is trying to turn this into a political thing today, other than condemning the ideology of the terrorist, okay? The ideology of the terrorist is a white supremacist ideology. It is fully evil. It is fully evil to suggest that if a Muslim lives in your neighborhood, that Muslim deserves to die because they are a threat to your white majority. It is sheer, absolute sick garbage. It is. You can have questions about the nature of radical Islam. That is not the same thing as suggesting that a Muslim in your neighborhood is a terrorist who is supposed to be shot at a mosque. It's disgusting. And anybody who is suggesting today that white supremacism doesn't have victims is, of course, being ignorant of the reality of the modern world. It is just untrue. That sort of stuff should be condemned. The ideology of the killer should be condemned. Now, what is wrong is to extend that ideology to people who do not believe it. So you see some people on the political left doing today, taking that ideology and saying, well, you believe that, don't you? No, typical mainline conservatives do not believe this stuff. They forcibly fight back against this stuff. Now, there's a reason that the same white supremacists on 4chan are not big fans of a lot of conservatives. I mean, again, this guy's manifesto itself said that he was not a conservative and didn't like conservatism because he felt it hadn't conserved. Okay, the fact is, white supremacy is indeed evil. We should all be front and forward in condemning the tribal politics of race. It's horrifying, and it has impact. We should. I legitimately don't understand why there's division on when this sort of stuff happens. I understand that people want to use flashpoints to push their particular politics. I understand that. But it does nothing but tear apart a civilization that is united on acts of evil like this sort of stuff. Iterate when it comes to stuff like this. We live in a world where flashpoints are used in order to politically polarize. I don't legitimately know where there should be serious political difference on the evil of this, and why you would point fingers at people who are not responsible for things, unless you are badly motivated. I don't know why you would do that. Everybody is united in condemning this, as well they should be, just like everybody was united in condemning the shooting at the Texas church or at the South Carolina church. We are all united when it comes to fighting acts of evil. It's why we have a civilization. If we were not united in fighting acts of evil, we would not have a civilization. And casting aspersions at people who believe the same way that you do, that this is an act of tremendous evil, and that the ideology that supports this act of evil is itself evil, that fighting those people or lumping them in with the bad guys, that is in and of itself horrifying and disgusting. It's really bad. It's really bad stuff. Okay, let's move on to President Trump and his emergency declaration. So the Senate voted yesterday to reject President Trump's emergency declaration. Immediately, Trump tweeted, "Veto," all capital letters. The Senate's resolution was passed 59-41 to overturn his national emergency declaration, them saying, we didn't delegate you this kind of power, and you are not allowed to simply overrule us by declaring a national emergency. And it does show that the national emergency power is to a certain extent being abused, because the fact is that the National Emergency Act was designed to allow the president to act in the absence of congressional opinion making or weighing in. The reason to declare a national emergency is you don't actually have time to go to Congress for the appropriations. You just declare a national emergency. It was the first time that I think has ever happened where Congress has explicitly rejected a national emergency declaration from a president. The reason for that, because the president negotiated with Congress. He didn't get what he wanted, and then he declared a national emergency. That is a violation of the constitutional order. That is not how the Constitution is supposed to work. President Trump said he was going to veto this. He said, I look forward to vetoing the just-passed Democrat-inspired resolution, which would open borders while increasing crime, drugs, and trafficking in our country. I thank all of the strong Republicans who voted to support border security and our desperately needed wall. Now, I know a lot of senators and members of the House who voted in favor of upholding the National Emergency Declaration. I don't think that that was the right move. I don't think that was the constitutional move. And in fact, you saw a bunch of Republicans who switched their position on this simply because President Trump does have a massive amount of support. The fact is that a bunch of senators flipped on this, most prominently Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska. He had said earlier, we absolutely have a crisis at the border, but as a constitutional conservative, I don't want a future Democratic president unilaterally rewriting gun laws or climate policy. If we get used to presidents just declaring an emergency anytime they can't get what they want from Congress, it will be almost impossible to go back to a constitutional system of checks and balances. Over the past decades, the legislative branch has given away too much power, and the executive branch has taken too much power. That seems like a pretty good predicate for voting against the National Emergency Declaration. And then he voted in favor of the National Emergency Declaration. He said the reason he did so is because he and Mike Lee had put forward a bill that would have curbed generally the power to declare a national emergency. And that bill had not been had not been agreed to by the president. Well, then why are you voting with him on this national emergency? That still doesn't answer the question. The fact is, this national emergency, the one being declared right now, is not, in fact, legally a national emergency. It is a national emergency in the common parlance. It is something that the Congress ought to do something about. We ought to have a wall. The president doesn't get to overstep his boundaries just because he's doing something you like. The measure of a principle is whether, if the violation of the principle accomplishes something that you want, you are for it or against it. So if you have a principle, and then it turns out that tossing out the principle in order to get something done appeals to you, so you toss out the principle, then you really didn't have the principle to begin with. You had a politics of convenience. It's not just Senator Sass who flipped on this sort of thing. Senator Tom Tillis wrote a full op-ed saying that he was not in favor of the national emergency declaration. He announced he would vote to terminate the national emergency declaration, and then he changed his mind and voted against terminating the national emergency declaration. And listen, I understand that there is severe pressure on these senators from people who are sitting home and who are thinking, okay, well, all this really comes down to is, do you want to protect the border or not? But that is a failure to educate your own voters, which is part of the job. And there's been this move in national politics toward, we will just appease whichever voters are in front of us. And it's our job to give the voters what they want. Well, that's half your job. The other half of your job is to help shape what voters want. It's to convince voters. It's to go back home and give people the hard messages. If you're not doing that, then you are not acting as a good representative. This is the difference between the sort of straight democratic representation model and the Burkean model of representation. Edmund Burke famously wrote that if you were a representative, then it was not just your job to represent the temporary wishes of the public. It was your job to represent, to act as your own conscience. They elected you to use your own conscience. And if the people don't like it, then I suppose they can turn you out. But they should give you a solid listen. They should give you a solid listen. Again, I think this should have passed with an overwhelming supermajority. It did not. That is a lack of principle on the part of a lot of Republicans, including many Republicans with whom I generally agree. And I think there is a case to be made. I think that you've heard Representative Dan Crenshaw make it, that if you really believe that it is legal for the president to declare a national emergency under current powers, then you vote in favor of this. But there were a bunch of people who said the president doesn't have those powers under the National Emergencies Act. And then they voted in favor of the president exercising powers he doesn't have. That's bad. Now, and I hear the excuses. Listen, I hear the excuses. The excuse that Democrats would do the exact same thing. That's true. That's why I'm not a Democrat. It is true. Democrats would go along with violations of the constitutional order, which is why, again, I am not a Democrat. So I guess you can continue to just go along with whatever the president wants if it mirrors your political preferences, but don't claim to be a constitutional conservative if you do. Okay, coming up, we're going to talk about Beto O'Rourke, and we're going to jump into the mailbag. First, you're going to have to subscribe over at dailywire.com. For a few weeks, we've been featuring a different Daily Wire annual subscriber every Friday as a thank you for helping support what we do over here. Today, I want to give a shout out to Malcolm Chua at CAIENTAI on Twitter. As you can see in this photo, Malcolm's adorable daughter, yes, I am assuming her sex, put her piggy bank savings into becoming a Daily Wire annual subscriber and then demanded, obviously, that Dad take a picture of her with the tumbler and then post it on Twitter. Either that or Malcolm is a subscriber and his daughter was just kind of sitting there. It's hard to tell which one is true. Anyway, Malcolm, thank you for being a subscriber. We really do appreciate it. If you want to experience the rush of adrenaline and joy Malcolm is surely feeling at this very instant, you have to be a Daily Wire annual subscriber. And you have to post a photo of your Tumblr on either Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag #LeftistTearsTumblr. You can even be in that photo if you would like. To become a subscriber, go to dailywire.com, click on the subscribe button at the top of the page, and then send us your Tumblr pics if you want a chance at getting a shout out on this show. There's also so much great stuff that you get when you become a subscriber over at Daily Wire. It means that you get access to the additional 2 hours of the show that we do every day just for you. You can ask me questions during the breaks. We'll answer your questions in the mailbag. When we have conversations, when we do episodes of The Conversation, you can ask questions. Actually, next week, we have a special episode of The Conversation. It's a live book signing. If you go over to premiercollectibles.com/Ben Shapiro, then you can actually buy a copy, a signed copy of my book. When you do that, for this time only, you'll be able to actually I'll answer your questions, even if you're not a subscriber. So go over to premiercollectibles.com/Ben Shapiro. We're doing that next Wednesday. So stick around at Daily Wire to check that out. Again, it's $99 a year for the annual. That's the one that you want. It is cheaper than the monthly. And you also get the Leftist Tears Tumblr. Also, make sure that you go subscribe over at YouTube and iTunes. Make sure that you leave us a review. We always appreciate it. We are the largest, fastest growing conservative podcast and radio show in the nation.